All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and legal tampering is here. We're going to be talking about Jake Matthews' extension, Foye Oluokun leaving for Jacksonville, and Tom Brady's return to the NFC South.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong on Twitter at falcfans, and of course, writing weekly content at the SB Nation for the Atlanta Falcons. You know it as the falcoholic.com, as well as the host of this preeminent Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I want to thank everyone that makes Locked On Falcons their first listen each and every day. We're coming at you Monday through Friday, each and every day on your favorite podcast platform, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, and also on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel and give us a like when you do. So, guys, today we're going to be talking about day one of the legal tampering period, where we got some moves, right? In terms of the Falcons extending Jake Matthews, we found out the fate of Foye Oluokun and his departure to Jacksonville. And also, in the last 24 hours since I recorded my last episode on Mock Draft Monday, we found out that one person in particular is returning to the NFC South after a brief hiatus, a brief vacation in the Cayman Islands or wherever he went over the last 6 weeks to reinvigorate his joy for playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So we'll get into all of that on today's episode, but let's start by talking about Jake Matthews' extension. He signed a 3-year, $52.5 million extension Monday morning. We didn't get any details of the move and the specifics of that contract, so we don't necessarily know how much cap space the Falcons saved, but I think it's fair to assume at the point that they probably saved at least $6 million off of it, because that's how much they would have saved with a simple max restructure on that contract. So you imagine by extending him, you hope to get a little bit more than you would have gotten with the restructure. Hopefully that number is in the $10 million range. On the first free agent Friday that we did over a week ago, I broke down a mock 2-year, $36.5 million extension for Jake Matthews, and the Falcons wound up saving about $8 million on that. So again, that's kind of the ballpark where I'm hoping. And this Jake extension was a little bit surprising. It didn't come out of nowhere because Steve Weish talked about it in late February as something that was on the horizon. But as you go back to yesterday's episode, when we talked about Matt Ryan's restructure over the weekend, sort of seemed to the fact that the Falcons decided to restructure Matt Ryan this past weekend indicated that maybe that Jake Matthews extension, as well as the Grady Jarrett extension, was not necessarily going to come before the league year started. And, talked about this a little bit, where you don't just see too many instances where a player that is not an impending free agent, so a player that is under contract and whatever the case may be, signs an extension before the start of the league year. Because as Andrew Brandt, the former Packers executive, always says, deadline spur action, and there really isn't a deadline for a player that's already under contract. And so that player tends to have a lot more leverage to sign one of these contract extensions. And for a team like the Falcons, who you imagine are trying to pinch pennies, that may not necessarily be a great mix for them to be able to do that, given that the player has a lot of the leverage in this situation, because it's the team that's up against it to try to get a deal done before a certain time period so that they can save money to spend in free agency, rather than a player needing to get that deal done at a certain point in time. So a little surprising to see that it came at this point in time, but certainly a move that hopefully will help the Falcons. Hopefully will also mean that the Steve Weich's report about the Falcons, trying to extend Grady Jarrett is also on the horizon. So potentially the Falcons could save even more money. And all of a sudden, we're looking at, right now we're at about $16 million in cap space. Hopefully with this Jake restructure, that maybe that's closer to $25 million in cap space. And then Grady Jarrett, could push the Falcons into the 30s $35 million range or whatever the case may be. And that's even before some cap cuts that we're sort of expecting to happen, which could get this team to that $38 million figure that when I did my 2 Free Agent Friday episodes the past 2 Fridays, that was the figure that we got to. So it does seem like it's possible that the Falcons could get to that $38 million figure and be able to spend all the money on some of the free agents that I was hoping the team to get. Now, as far as what this means for the Falcons, I think, obviously you get the immediate cap space. Obviously, you lock up a bookend left tackle, one of the few good players on the Falcons offensive line. And no, I do not entertain the sort of anti-Jake Matthews rhetoric amongst some of our fan base. That stems mostly from some early, career struggles, as well as a really rough outing in that Super Bowl. Now what are we talking about, 5 years ago? And people still don't seem to let that go, that Jake's been lights out for the last 3 years. So, I think the concern you have is, longevity with Jake at this point in time, at this point in his career, where he's approaching age 30, 31 or 30, I think. And now this 3-year extension, extends his contract from 2023 through 2026. Now, whether he plays that long, but 2026 is his age 34 season, and that will be the same age that Trent Williams is now. So it's not unprecedented for, a left tackle to play into his mid-30s. I think Andrew Whitworth is like 40 now or 41 or whatever, and on the verge of retirement. So, it's not crazy. Jake's dad and his uncle Bruce and Clay, respectively, both played into their 40s. So it's not unheard of for Jake. If he were to play another 5 years, it wouldn't be a total shocker, but it's just not the norm at this point in NFL players' careers. So we'll see what Jake's longevity does. For a lot of people, they'll probably think, oh, this means that the Falcons are definitely in win now mode and they're ready to go all in, particularly if they wind up extending Grady Jarrett and securing some of these veteran players. I think that's a fair assessment to say, but at the same time, I don't think people should read into the fact that the Falcons extend Jake Matthews and Grady Jarrett, as we often try to tie it to Matt Ryan and his future in Atlanta. We'll just sort of have to see, because again, as valuable as Jake is protecting Matt Ryan's blind side, he would also be probably pretty valuable to a young rookie that the Falcons may wind up making the transition to in the next year or two as well. And if you have Jake Matthews locked up for the next, 2, 3 or more years, depending on how this extension is structured, it makes a lot of sense in that regard. So it's basically the best of both worlds. So that's part of the reason why it makes a ton of sense. It not only solidifies, Matt Ryan's last couple of years, it also potentially lays the foundation for another young player, just so that he doesn't necessarily have to, have the Falcons need to be looking for a bookend left tackle at a premium position in the years to come, which we know can be difficult for teams to find. So that's where we'll leave the Jake Matthews extension talk, and we'll get into some more NFL moves from around the league and look at one Falcon player that is not staying, and that's Foye Oluokun, and what that means for the Falcons as well as his future. But in addition to that, we know that the NFL is making big new moves, but the MLB, Major League Baseball, is also making big moves, including what's going on with my cousin Freddie. And of course, you can find out the latest on that by checking out the Locked On Braves podcast, free and available on all the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons, including on YouTube. So it is that time of year, and college basketball's big tournament is upon us. Some people call it March Madness. And if you're looking for the latest odds, contests, and player props, BetOnline is your number one source for all your sports betting needs and info. You can enter in their $250,000 Bracket Madness contest for the next few days, and there will be hundreds of winners, and the top prize gets $75,000. And it's not just that basketball contest, because BetOnline remains the number one spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season, as you look for more sports wagering information and odds. And you can now go to betonline.net and get early insight into the Masters tournament, the next UFC event, and even the 2022 World Cup. Find it all at betonline.net. BetOnline, where the game starts. So Monday at noon Eastern kicked off the legal tampering period. And while the Falcons didn't make any moves, at least as of, the 6 hours after that point that I'm recording this, They did lose one free agent, and that was Foye Oluokun, their linebacker, who signed a massive 3-year, $45 million contract with $28 million guaranteed with the Jaguars. Or I should say, he agreed to terms, right? Because legal tampering, you technically can't sign with another team. You just agree to terms. And we have to specify that because a couple of years ago, when they first started this, Anthony Barr agreed to terms with the Jets in the legal tampering period. And ultimately, when the league year officially starting, he had to sign his contract on the dotted line. He decided, nah, I'm good. I'm going back to Minnesota. So we say Foye Oluokun agreed to terms with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He hasn't signed anything yet. Technically, he's still available. The Falcons could swoop in with a last minute contract, but given the size of that contract, I am highly doubtful that the Falcons will swoop in at the last minute and match that or exceed that contract. And then that contract currently makes Foye Oluokun, according to overthecap.com, the fourth highest paid off-ball linebacker in the NFL behind Darius Leonard, Fred Warner, and CJ Mosley. He's actually getting more per year, $15 million, than what Myles Jack signed with the Jaguars when they extended him back in 2019, and he's making $14.25 million. Although if you adjust for salary cap inflation from what the cap has risen over the last 3 years, Jack's money would be actually worth more than the $15 million a year in today's salary cap dollars, but that's neither here nor there. And as I said, that contract, $15 million a year for Foye Oluokun, just seems way too rich for the Atlanta Falcons. We had been hearing reports all week long leading up to this legal tampering that Foye Oluokun was going to get paid a lot of money, much more than people were expecting. And we were hoping, we were going into this offseason process in the last couple of months, been talking about, well, maybe they can sign Foye Oluokun for like $8 to $10 million. And maybe because it's considered to be a deep draft class, that will keep the prices down. And that was not the case. And very quickly, over the last 7 days, it became very clear that that wasn't necessarily going to be a reality. And so that's, it's tough for the Falcons to lose their middle linebacker, but it's great news for Foye Oluokun, who's absolutely worked hard to make, that type of money, and is everything that you want in the player that went from a 6th-round pick, safety turned linebacker, Ivy League small school guy, started out as a special teamer, worked his way into the starting lineup, became, the middle linebacker, taking over as sort of the leader and the quarterback of the defense. So he checks all the boxes that you want to see. And it's nice to see him really cash in here as a player moving forward, and a great move for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I saw a lot of people talking about, the Falcons not being able to afford that money and Foye not being worth that money. Again, that's a matter of opinion. I saw a lot of people, on Twitter sort of looking at Foye's deal in comparison to the deal that Devondre Campbell also signed on Monday, agreed to terms with his Green Bay Packers, and which was for $10 million a year, and sort of people opining, oh, I would rather have Campbell at $10 million than Foye at $15 million, which again is a perfectly valid opinion for folks to have. But, I haven't talked about this, I don't think, on a podcast, but I've certainly talked about it on Twitter. But one of the things I've seen a lot of over the last 3 months with Falcon fans is sort of this revisionist history about Devondre Campbell's time here in Atlanta, just because Devondre Campbell played really well for the Packers this past year and was an all-pro and all that various stuff. People want to sit here and act like, oh, the Falcons made this huge mistake by letting Devondre Campbell go, and he was actually secretly good in Atlanta, and the Falcons made this terrible decision by paying Deion Jones. And I just kind of find that revisionist history very ridiculous. If I joke, if you time travel back to like 2-3 years ago and told somebody, hey, we should pay Devondre Campbell $50 million and let Deion Jones walk or something like that, that person would, you would get locked up. It would be like, this person is a danger to the community and to themselves. They're out here spouting crazy things on street corners and whatnot. And so I sit here and I go like, look, Devondre Campbell, kudos to him. He's worked his tail off to get better, and he deserves every single dollar that he is currently making. But that revisionist history that people want to sit here and act like Devondre Campbell wasn't really bad here in Atlanta, particularly over that last year and a half in the second half of 2018 and then throughout the 2019 season, is kind of ridiculous to me. So that's sort of my official stance on the revisionist history. But again, Devondre Campbell, more power to you. You worked your tail off to go from where you were 2 years ago in 2019, 2 seasons ago when you left Atlanta as a very not good linebacker to a very good linebacker this past year, and you deserve all this money. So I'm not saying that to slander Devondre Campbell. But as for the Falcons, in terms of moving on from Foye Oluokun, we've already talked about this possibility before. If you go back to this past Friday's Free Agent Friday, where I outlined the defensive free agents that I would like to see the team sign, we sort of already predicted that Foye Oluokun would walk, and some options for the Falcons to potentially replace him are two free agents from Tennessee that should be. We'll see how it goes. You never know with this stuff. A lot of players on Monday were getting paid a lot more than I thought. I think on the original Free Agent Friday, I had Will Disley signing a 1 year, like $2.5 million contract with the Falcons to be their tight end too, and he re-signed with the Seahawks for like 3 years, $24 million. So and if you had asked me Foye is going to get $15 million a year, I would have been like, nah, he might get like 12 or 13 or something like that. So again, who knows if Jayon Brown and Rashaan Evans are going to get sort of cheap deals or whatever the case may be. But those are two potential candidates that are well known to Dean Pease from his time in Tennessee. Jayon Brown was that Mike linebacker in Tennessee, and so it makes a lot of sense to sort of fill the shoes of Foye Oluokun. I do not expect the Falcons to try to fill Oluokun's shoes with either Deion Jones or Mykal Walker. They could do that. But, Dean Pease has already talked throughout the season on the reasons why they wanted to have Foye at the mic and Deion at the will, just because Deion's, as they say, a little light in the pants in that regard. I don't think his opinion is going to change on that, despite Deion's experience at that Mike little linebacker. Not to mention, we're all kind of hoping that the Falcons trade Deion Jones in the next week until, he's about 6 days, as most of you are listening. Next Monday on the 21st, he is due, I think, a $5 million roster bonus. So that would be the time, the deadline, and say deadline spur action. That would be the time to try to trade him before that roster bonus is due. So we're all kind of sitting here hoping over the next week that the Falcons will trade Deion Jones for whatever they can get, even if it's like a 6th or 7th round pick, just to get the salary dump or whatever the case may be. I think will be worthwhile. And then you can use that money to go out there and sign, a Jayon Brown or Rashaan Evans. And nor do I think Mykal Walker is likely to be plugged into that spot, because Mykal Walker has gotten little work at that Mike linebacker spot, even this past year. In the instances where Foye Oluokun missed, a little bit of snaps this past year, it wasn't Mykal Walker that stepped into the game. It was Darren Bates that came into the game to be that Mike linebacker. So it doesn't sound like the Falcons are that interested in Deion Jones or Mykal Walker to be the Mike linebacker. So I do expect, if the Falcons are going to fill Foye Oluokun's shoes, it's going to be someone from outside the organization than someone currently within the organization to fill those shoes. And again, it could be a free agent like a Jayon Brown. It could also be a draft pick. We've talked a number of times over the last couple of months about the possibility that the Falcons could use potentially their first round pick on a linebacker. And that reality was kind of hinged on what would happen with Foye Oluokun. If he walked in free agency, that would increase the odds. If the Falcons wind up trading Deion Jones in the next 6 days, that would certainly increase the odds as well. And we've mentioned Devin Lloyd, the linebacker out of Utah, as a possibility. Again, I don't think he would be where I put most of my money on if I was betting on who the Falcons first round pick would be, but he is sort of a dark horse candidate at that 8th overall spot. But again, this draft class is considered to be relatively deep at the linebacker position. And so therefore, I think if the Falcons are, comfortable waiting on day 2 to get a starting caliber linebacker, I think they can find somebody, in that 2nd through 4th round range that could come in and give them, reps at that middle linebacker spot, but probably not a guy unless they land someone like a Nakobe Dean that I would expect to be able to come in and give immediately, more value than what a Foye Oluokun would potentially give them. And no, I don't think Nakobe Dean is in the mix at that 8th overall spot. I've talked before about small linebackers not getting valued highly by the NFL. I don't think, given what Dean Pease has said about, wanting that middle linebacker to play more in that A gap and be a little bit more physical at the point of attack, drafting a 5'11", 229-pound linebacker like Nakobe Dean at 8 doesn't make a ton of sense. Now, if the Falcons were to trade back in the draft or trade up from, round 2, where it sounds like Nakobe Dean is going to get picked in the bottom half of the first round. So somewhere between like pick 15 and 32, probably in the 20s, based off of this. Now we'll see if that changes, if he runs a particularly fast 40 at his pro day, and gets into the 4.4s or 4.3s or something like that. And given how Georgia players ran at the combine already this month, I wouldn't necessarily dismiss it out of hand. So we'll see what happens with the draft and all various things, but certainly we'll have to start paying a little bit more attention to some of these linebackers when we do some of these mock draft Mondays and as we get into April and sort of turn our full attention to the draft, and whatnot. So that's what's on deck. And I know a lot of people are frustrated. Oh, the Falcons are being quiet or too quiet, and again, it's only the first few hours of legal tampering. There's still, as I'm recording this, there's still like 46 hours left of that, to go on. And so I think people probably need to relax a little bit on that. I've seen the Falcons connected to a couple of free agents, like ESPN's Marcel Louis-Jacques, who covers the Dolphins for ESPN, mentioned the Falcons as one of the teams interested in Dolphins outside linebacker Brendan Scarlett, who's kind of a special teams guy, but also has some starting experience as an outside linebacker with Houston and with Miami. I've seen betonline.ag put Juju Smith-Schuster, one of his top teams in terms of odds to sign with if he doesn't stay in Pittsburgh, as the Falcons. I think they're number 2 behind the Titans. So again, that's nothing official or anything like that. But, if you're we'll see if there's anything, any fire to that smoke in terms of some of those connections. And we'll see what happens over the rest of the week. Again, Terry Fontenot basically told you guys that they're not going to necessarily rush out and throw a whole bunch of money around in free agency at the combine presser. So I think you got to be patient. We know that the Falcons are going to slow play this and try to find bargains, and you're not going to get bargains on Monday of legal tampering. You're going to get bargains on like Saturday and Sunday later this week is when you can start to really get those bargains. So I would stress patience for the time being. But I know patience can be hard in wanting this Falcon team to move the needle, especially now that things are changing in the NFC South with, rumors of, a certain quarterback from Houston making his way to the NFC South, as well as the fact that a certain quarterback that used to play in New England has made his way back to the NFC South. And we'll talk about the impact of Tom Brady's return to the Falcons, as well as the rest of the NFC South, as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. But before we get there, guys, if you want to stay plugged onto all the moves going on around the NFL, of course, you should subscribe to the Locked On NFL podcast on your favorite podcast platform, as well as on YouTube. And you can, of course, find that on Apple, Odyssey, Google, and Spotify, as well as YouTube. So as we move on today on Locked On Falcons, I want to let you know that it is brought to you by Rock Auto. With ever increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why wait while that person behind the counter orders parts on their computer when you already have access to rockauto.com at home or in your pocket? Save time and money when using Rock Auto instead of spending up to twice as much for the same auto parts that you can find at a chain store or a car dealership. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years with reliably low prices for every customer. They have everything you need, from brake parts to tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. Go to rockauto.com right now. It's an easy-to-use website, and you can see all the parts available for your car or truck. And when you do, write Locked On in the How Did You Hear About Us box so that they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So Tom Brady returned to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and his official announcement that he was going to play football occurred after I recorded my mock draft Monday on Sunday afternoon. And to be honest with you, I don't have any major commentary on it. Obviously I'm not thrilled about Tom Brady returning and tormenting Falcon fans one more time. I guess the silver lining is that Matt Ryan will have one more chance, at least one more chance, 2 more opportunities to beat Tom Brady once. We've never beaten this guy. So it's like, okay, we get another bite at that apple. Although if they wind up getting swept again by the Bucs, it's just going to be like, why are we doing this? But I saw a lot of people being like, and you couple that with the rumors that, the top two candidates to land Deshaun Watson in another blockbuster quarterback trade, now that his legal troubles are less troubling, I guess, from a criminal standpoint, although he still has all these civil suits going against him. We won't get into that on today's episode, but like you look at the potential arrival of Tom Brady, return of Tom Brady, and arrival of Deshaun Watson completely changes the landscape of the NFC South, where a lot of Falcon fans over these last couple of months have been licking their chops since Tom Brady's initial retirement, since Sean Payton stepping away. I think we'll see Sean Payton returning to the NFL sidelines in the very near future, not necessarily in 2022, but probably in 2023 with the Dallas Cowboys. It just feels inevitable. Tom Brady's return felt inevitable. That Sean Payton this feels inevitable as well. But I think a lot of Falcon fans were licking their chops, and we talked about this in episodes back in January, February, whenever it was, that the Falcons can make a run at the NFC South. And I always thought that notion was overrated. I talked about it previously on the podcast. I feel like the Falcons can't like necessarily look at their own division and be that concerned about it and be like, oh, we got a golden opportunity. Like, you don't have a golden opportunity. Like, certainly, in a division where it's Taysom Hill and Kyle Trask and Sam Darnold, you're sitting there being like, hey, we got the best quarterback situation going on, and we know that those other teams aren't necessarily going to be 13-3 juggernauts. So it does give the Falcons somewhat of a better shot at making a run at the postseason. But I just always kind of felt like that whole notion of, oh, the NFC South is up for grabs, or the Falcons are the front runners, it was kind of an exaggeration notion, because like ultimately, regardless of what the other teams in the division are doing, the Falcons still have the same holes, and particularly with that pass rush, right? When we're really talking about some of these other teams, we're looking at the pass rush mainly. And whether it's Tom Brady or Kyle Trask or, Blaine Gabbert handling the Bucks, lining up under center, the Falcons need to find better ways of getting pressure on the quarterback. And regardless of who the NFC South quarterbacks are, they still have Justin Herbert, Matt Stafford, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson on their schedule this year. And we know that high level quarterbacks, the only chance you have of slowing those guys down is by pressuring the quarterback. And we know that when you have low level quarterbacks, if you pressure those guys like we did a couple of years ago against Kyle Allen, it can lead to a lot of success. But if you don't, then the Taysom Hills of the world, there's a reason why Taysom Hill is 3-0 against the Falcons as a starting quarterback, is because the Falcons can't get any pressure on him. So it's like one of those things, like, who cares who the quarterbacks are? You still need to upgrade your pass rush, right? Like, you still need to upgrade your run defense. You still got to get better in the back end in coverage. You still got to upgrade your pass protection. You still got to do all of these things, improve the running game and whatnot. All of these things are the path to the Falcons' success, and it doesn't really matter what the teams in the NFC South are doing, right? The fact that the Falcons couldn't stop the run meant that Tim Boyle nearly beat them a year ago, And so, like, the one play that saved their season was made by Foye Oluokun, thanks to pressure by, I believe it was Dante Fowler on that particular play. The Falcons got pressure for once, and boom, they won a game all of a sudden. So it's just one of those things where, like, I feel like we spend too much energy focusing on external issues when it comes to the Falcons, particularly in this division, and not the internal issues. These are all areas that the Falcons have to get better at. And I don't say all this to be negative, like, oh, the Falcons are trash, or it's just one of those things where it's just like, this is the same, again, not to be a condescending jerk when I say this, but like, this is the same fan base that, sat here for months saying, oh, this is a bottom 5 roster, but now also wants to sit here and be like, oh, we're a legit playoff team. And like, that to me is just a perfect example of a cognitive dissonance and how just people say things just to fit a narrative. If you believe that this was a bottom 5 roster, you shouldn't even be considering thinking about the playoffs, right? Now, if you didn't think it was a bottom 5 roster, which, I secretly think a lot of you guys didn't, you just said it because it fit a narrative, then maybe you can convince yourself that, a playoff is, on the horizon or whatever the case may be. But again, I just feel like the Falcons' goal should be focused on improving those areas, improving in the trenches predominantly. And if they can do that, then we can have a real conversation about, okay, maybe this division is legitimately up for grabs. And, so that's kind of how I feel about it. So Tom Brady returning or not doesn't really matter all that much to me, because I'm more focused on sort of the internal issues that the Falcons are dealing with. Are they going to be better in the trenches? I'm more worried about Vita Vea than I am Tom Brady. You know what I'm saying? Like once we get to that Sunday where we're facing Tom Brady, then I'm like, oh, here we go. Tom Brady going to light us up again, Mike Evans and all that stuff. But like for now, I'm like, can we block Vita Vea? Can we stop Shaq Barrett? Can we, can someone get pressure, can beat Tristan Wirfs around the edge to get some pressure on the quarterback or whatever the case may be? Those are the things that I'm concerned about. And now, of course, because Tom Brady's return, it's caused some of these Bucs free agents that people thought maybe would be a mass exodus. Some of these guys are returning in the fold. Ryan Jensen, Carlton Davis in the 24 hours since Brady announced his return to the league. So we'll just see how that goes, whoop-de-doo. So clearly I'm not thrilled about Tom Brady return, but it's not necessarily, I'm not one of these folks that's like, oh my God, it completely changes everything. And we have to completely, like all of a sudden we were going to go all in on winning the division, but now Tom Brady's back and we have to like, no, we have to sell all of our assets and completely tear it down. Like that to me is just being very, very dramatic. So I just think the Falcons need to keep their head down, build a good roster, and worry about the teams, in their division and what they're doing a little bit later down the road. Right. So that's my thoughts on that. And we'll see what also comes later this week as we continue breaking down some of this news. Tomorrow we should have Josh Kendall of The Athletic to give his thoughts on what he's expecting from the Falcons this week as a free agent frenzy is frenzied around us, and it may not necessarily descend too much on Atlanta, at least early in the week. So we'll get his thoughts on all that. And of course, in addition to making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day, I always like to recommend second listens. And of course, why not plug the Locked On NFL Draft podcast if you're curious on how all these free agent moves affect, what teams are going to do in the draft. The Jaguars, in addition to signing Foye Oluokun, signed a whole bunch of guys on Monday. And so maybe that impacts who could go number one in the draft. So Locked On NFL Draft, hosted by Ryan Tracy and Eric Crocker, are probably the perfect place to find out that information. And you can, of course, subscribe to Locked On NFL Draft on all the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons, including on YouTube. So guys, that's going to do it for us here on Locked On Falcons. Appreciate it. Till then.